Okay, I think we should get started because it's almost 5 after 6. So the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Beis sort of repeats a machlokes between Eliezer and the Tanakama that we had already, and that was Dam Tamimim Bedam Balimim. If you had blood of Tamimim that got mixed up with the Dam of Balimim, Yishavech la'amo it's all spilled out. But if it's kois b'koisos, meaning we have distinct koisos of Dam, some of these koisos, most of these koisos are all dam of kosher or karbonis that need rishvika, but one of these koisos was holding the dam of a balmul. So Rabbi Eliezer said, although you're not supposed to be makriv and bezerk any of these koisos, because they all might be the dam of a balmum, im korav koisechot, if mistakenly one of the koisos they reserved to dam, so now we could say that was likely the one that was the balmum, then yikruvu kol koisos. All of the other koisos you could be zayrik, and if you remember, Rabbi Losher taught us that's only in pairs. So going back to Daf Pei Amud Aleph, which is where we're starting today, right after the Mishnah, the Gemara asks the following question. Amar Rabbi Lozer, Zok Rabbi Lozer, Loi Hichsher Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer did not allow the dam of all of these kalim to be spritzed, elo shnayim, only in pairs. And that was because of that migui that we had in every pair of koises that you're going to be zoyer to dam. One of them for sure is not a balmum. So you could say migui that one is not a balmum, so too the second one is not a balmum. Aval echad loy, but individually, each kois you should not be zoyer to dam. Most of Avdimi, fracture Avdimi, from a comment that the Chachamim made to disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. And the Chachamim said, Afilu korvu kulon chutz me'echad mehen, even if they already made zrika on every single kois of dam, except for one, and there's only one left, Zok the Chachamim yishafech la'ama. You still have to spill it out, even though it's highly likely that the dam of the balmum was already spritzed, and this last remaining kois is not balmum. If the Chachamim is expressing their opinion that it's Yishafech La'ama in this case, so it's obvious that Rabbi Eliezer holds that you could use it. The problem is Rabbi Eliezer just taught us that if there's only one left, you cannot use it. You cannot spritz it. Let me explain to you what the Chachamim mean when they say Chutz me'echad. My echad zug echad. The Chachamim are saying even if there's only one pair of koisos left, you still cannot use them. There, Rabbi Eliezer argues, no, since there's two left, you could make zrika on both of them. Why is it that the Tana had to tell us this machlekes about Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon by koisos of dam, like in our Mishnah, and in the earlier Mishnah, when we learned this machlekes related to a varim of the balmum that got mixed in with a varim of the tamim. It's the same halacha. It isn't. You need both halachas. If we only had the case of the varim, the last Mishnah, then Rabbi Eliezer, there Rabbi Eliezer will allow the varim to be put on the mizbeach. You know why? Because mishum dis avid beikaparosa. The ones that are kosher karbonos are Ganzen kosher. The zrika had already been done, and now the ivarim got mixed up. But when there's karbonis that didn't even have their rotzon yet, because the zrika has not yet been accomplished. And now we're discussing whether the zrika should be accomplished under these circumstances. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer would ignore that. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer would ignore that you should not make the zrika. So that's why our Mishnah with the Zrika is a bigger Chiddush from Rabbi Eliezer. We eat Marbaha, but if we only had the greater Chiddush, our Mishnah, that Rabbi Eliezer says you could even make the Zrika under this uncertain circumstances, then I would say Baha Krabi Rabbanan. Maybe Dafka by Zrika, do the Rabbanan argue and say don't make the Zrika? Because we don't even know if the carbon is kosher yet. You didn't do the Zrika. Maybe if you did this week already, and it's only a question of Evarim, Ema Maidul Luhu, Ema Maidul Eliezer. Maybe even the Rabbanon would agree that you could be Makir Devarim Besafik. Shricha, that's why the Tana shared with us this machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon, side by Zrika Zadam as an Mishnah, and side by Evarim that got mixed up in one another, like in the earlier Mishnah. Zok Heilige Gemara Tanan Hasam. We learned in the Mishnah. Sluchis Shenaflu L'Seicha Mayim Kolshu. You had a jug that was holding mechatos, the valuable mixture of ashes and water. And what happened? Some standard water that was not kosher l'shrika fell into this cave. So, how do you deal with this? Rabbi Eliezer says, Yaza shtei. Anytime you make a zrika on somebody because you want to be mitarehim with this mechatos, you have to do two zrikas. One wouldn't be enough because of the suffix somehow. And the Gemara is going to spend a lot of time to figure out the justification for Rabbi Eliezer. The Chacham said, no, there's no eitz over here, and this mechatos can no longer be used to be mitayr somebody that's tummy. Zot Gemara, Yishlomo Rabbanon, I could appreciate and understand the sheet of the Rabbanon. Savri, they hold yeshbil. The first thing they hold is that there's something called dilution. When you drop water into this mechatos, it spreads out and it equalizes. Therefore, any drop of water that you're going to take to make a zrika with will definitely have some content of the mechatos and definitely will have some content of this parcel of water. Now, it's important to note that at this point, it doesn't equalize. Because we're not going to say that there'll be the same ratio. For instance, if it was 10% non-kosher water and 90% mechatos, you won't say that each drop has that same construction of 90-10. Yesh Bila just means there'll be some of each in each drop, but what the exact ratio found in each drop is not necessarily the same ratio of the water that got mixed into the mechatos. So, principle number one, the Rabbanan hold yesh bila. So there will be a little bit of the mechatos everywhere. And the vazah tzricha shir. But hazah needs a shir, meaning there has to be a minimum amount of water that's going to be part of the hazah. Now we have a problem because if every drop has content of the parcel of water, you might not have your shear in your hazah. And you might suggest, okay, so make one hazah. Now there might not be enough content of mechatos in it, so make a second hazah, and between the two hazahs, there will surely be enough content. But the problem is, the Chacham holds the ein mitzvah from the hazahs. You cannot combine the amount of mechatos in hazah 1 to the amount of mechatos in hazah 2. So because of that, there is no solution. There's no way you can get one hazah that will have the minimum. But though we can be sure that you can have one hazah that will contain the minimum amount of mechatos required to satisfy the minimum required. So that explains the Rabbanan. It's Rabbi Eliezer that's puzzling. Ela Rabbi Eliezer, my kasover. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold? Ikasover ein bila. If he holds that just because water mixed into the mechatos, that doesn't mean that they dilute together. Rather, there might be pockets of only mechatos here, and there might be pockets of only parcel of water here. So, if he holds ein bila, then kimaza shtei hazois maiha. How does it help, according to Rabbi Eliezer, to spritz two hazois? Dilma tarvayu maya kamazi. Maybe both those hazois happen to be from a pocket of water that's not the mechatos, and there's no zrikas mechatos here at all. Ella, you're forced to say yesh bila. It must be that Rabbi Eliezer holds yesh bila, and therefore any little zrika you make definitely has some content of mechatos in it. Zog to Gemara, Ika Savar, if he holds ein hazot tzricha shir, if he holds there's no minimum amount required content in the zrika, well then lomo lishta hazois. You don't need to hazois because we know for sure each hazot had some content of mechatos, and some content, as minimal as it might be, is adequate. So why do I need a second hazah? So it must be elak asofer hazah tri chashir. It must be that Eliezer holds hazah does have a minimum shear, and you might not have reached that shear in the first shrika, and therefore you must go for a second shrika. Now, if you hold like the Chachamim held that ein mitzdarfen lazois, you cannot combine the content of mechatos from zrika A to zrika B. Kimaza shte hazois mahape. It won't help to have a second zrika because you cannot combine the content of these two zrikas. But even if you're going to tell me that you could combine the content of two hazois, mi yemar the mali le shiura. How do you know that there's enough content in between the two zrikas that you made? We still don't know you have enough. There could be just a tiny little bit if you hold that hazah shrika share. So the problem is we don't have any set of parameters that would dictate that a second hazah would solve our problem. So the Gemara offers up three different approaches to explain the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. The first of which is Rabbi Reish Lakish. Amar Reish Lakish, la'olam yesh bila. We're going to be forced to say yesh bila, as we agreed in the earlier Shakalavatari. And he has to hold Ba'azah Tricha Shir, and that's why we need a second Azah. But the question is, even if you hold that you could combine the two Azahs, the Gemara asks, how do you know even between the two Azahs that you're going to have adequate content to fulfill the minimum Shir Zrika? Zog to Gemara, we don't have a jug of mechatos that a little bit of, or a lot of it of water fell into. It was literally equal parts. So there was only one sheer hazaya of kshera mechatos, and that exact amount is how much water got mixed in. So now let's see how the chips fall. You were concerned that maybe you don't have enough content. If you do two zrikas, that means you used up all the water here. So if you used up all the water here, clearly you had the full shear of the mechatos, and since he hold that zrikas are mitzdarif, your two zrikas help. So the combination of shitas are, he holds yesh bila, so there's content of both in every drip. He holds hazat shricha shir, so you can't just do one zrika, and he holds that since there's only two drops, two shirim here, and you're doing two zrikas, so you're using up all the content, you've definitely used up the full shear of the kosher mechatos, and that's why two zrikas will help. But there's a new kimta here. It's speaking when there was exactly two shiurim of zrika that were in this mixture. And then we've covered all our bases. That is how Reish Lakish understands the Shita Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Amar says, no. I will agree with you that yesh bila. But I'm also going to hold Hazah in Shricha Shir. Hazah doesn't need a shear. So the obvious kash is, if Hazah doesn't need a shear, then the first shriek would have been enough. Any minimum content of mechatos in this drop would have been enough. Why a second shear? So Rava, the only reason Rabbi Eliezer asks for a second zrika is uknasa the kansu rabbanon. The rabbanon made a knas to require the second zrika. You know why? Ki heicha the loy mishtarish lay. If people start seeing that even if there's a mixture, you can spritz, so then they'll say, you know what, let's always dilute it with water. This way, we'll always have more mechatos. We don't want that. We want the mechatos to remain pure. So they made this knas. If got mixed in, you're going to have to do two zrikas. You're going to have to use it up anyway. Okay? So that means you don't benefit from that. So that's the second shot in Rebbe Eliezer. And then we have a third shot, Rav Ashi Amar. And this is very difficult to understand, Rav Ashi Amar, because he doesn't say anything. Rav Ashi Amar Ein Bila. So Rashi tells us right off the bat that this girsa of Rav Ashi is mishubeshes. So Rashi learns that this is what Rav Ashi says. Rav Ashi says, Mayim kol shehutna. Only a drop of water got mixed in. So unlike Rish Lakish, who said it was mixed echad be'echad, he said, no, there might have been a lot more mechatos, but there's only a drop of posel water that got mixed in. And Rav Ashi holds ein bila. He holds ein bila. So it's possible that in the first drop, you didn't have any content of mechatas, but therefore yazash te'azoyis. And Rashi explains, Usvir leila Rabashi. Rabashi holds hazah in shricha shir. Really, hazah doesn't need any shir at all, just like Rava. Umiu knasa lesle, but he doesn't hold of Rava's knas to require a second zrika. So why does he need a second zrika? Hilchach yaver svir leyesh bila. If he held yesh bila, then bechad ahava sagile. Then only one zrika would have been enough because the tiniest bit of content would have been adequate to be Mekayim Zrika. But Ushtei Azois, Rabbi Eliezer, we shouldn't suffer Ein Bila. Rabbi Ashi understood that Rabbi Eliezer holds Ein Bila. So Reish Lakish and Rava both understand Rabbi Eliezer to say Yesh Bila. Rabbi Ashi is different from Reish Lakish and Rava because he understands that Rabbi Eliezer holds Ein Bila. So therefore, Hilchach Imozi Chada, if you only do one Zrika, Shema in kan minaksherim klum. Maybe your first rika was all non-mechatos water. But if you do a second zrika, avokimaza tarti, but when he does two zrikos, after the leko bechadim minaksherim. There must have been some content of the kosher mechatos. How do I know this? The ein kan minapsulin elakoshu. Since it's speaking for only a kolshu of posel of water mixed in, by doing two zrikas, one of these two zrikas for sure had to have had the minimum content of mechatos, which would render the zrika a good zrika. So those are our three approaches. Rabbi Ashi departs from those shitas of Rav and Rish Lakish, and he holds in a Rebbe Eliezer Ein Bila. Frek Gemara Mesa. The Gemara asks a kasha on Rabashi and proves that Rebbe Eliezer holds yesh, because it says as follows: Rebbe Omer. There's a brayso that says Rebbe says l'divei Rebbe Eliezer. According to Rebbe Eliezer, hazah kol shehu mitaheres. Even the slightest amount of content of mechatos will be mitaher. Now Rebbe Eliezer specifically is talking about a non-mixture. He's speaking about a non-mixture. And he says the smallest amount of mechatos will be mitar. Zok Rebbe, according to Rebbe Eliezer, hazah in shrichashir. So obviously there's no minimum amount that you need for hazaya. And he adds that even hazah smech the kosher umech tzapos. Not only did Rebbe Eliezer say that if you have pure undiluted mechatos, a tiny amount is adequate. But even if you have diluted mechatos, a tiny amount is adequate. Now, how is that possible? Maybe that tiny amount is not the water of the mechatos. It must be that, at least the way Rabbi understands, Rabbi Eliezer, that he holds yesh bila. One moment, please. So we know for sure that Rabbi Eliezer must say yesh bila. It's going to be shver. How could Rabbi Ashi learn in Rabbi Eliezer that Ein Bila. So that's the kasha now, but the kasha gets bigger, turning onto Amud Beis. Now we're going to ask another kasha on Rashi. But oid Tanya behedja. We also have a Mefurisha Brisa. Let me just go back for 1 second. Rashi describes the kasha here that we're asking from Rebbe. And I made a mistake. So I want to look at the bottom Rashi. Rebbe said that Hazas mechta kasha mechta pasul. Now I said the kasha here is on Rab Ashi because Rab Ashi holds Ein Bila in Rab Eliezer, and clearly you see Yesh Bila, but the kasha is more. So let's look at Rashi. Hazas mechta kasha mechta pasul v'loy tema hazah kolshu hidik sheira. Don't just say that if you have pure, undiluted mechatos, the tiniest amount is adequate. Umiu loyala ima taruvas psul, but that's only if it's pure and undiluted. Ella afilu yesh ba taruvas psul machshir. You see from Rabbi Eliezer that even if there's a taruvas of psul mixed in, it will still be kosher. Alma time with Rabbi Eliezer, the boy Tarki. Now you see the reason why Rabbi Eliezer holds you need two zrikas, lav mishum tzirafu litzarfoi lechashir. It can be because of tziruf. The katani ain't tzricha. The kashal Rish Lakish. This is shver on Rish Lakish as well, because Rish Lakish says that you need a shear, and Rish Lakish holds you need it to be mitzaref, the two zrikas. According to Rebbe, you don't need to be mitzaref two zrikas because hazah ain't a zrika shear, and even the tiniest bit of content would be adequate. So therefore, it's shver on Rish Lakish's approach. It's shver on Rabashi's approach as well. But it's shver on Rish Lakish because Rish Lakish says that hazah tzricha shear. You see clearly from Rebbe that hazah ain't tzricha shear. The oid, the next kasha on Amud Beis is only on Rabashi. So, Frek Gemara v'oid on Rabashi, Tanya behedja. We learned on before Shabraisa. Hanitnin lamayla shenis arvu b'nitnin lamata. There was dam that was supposed to be spritzed lamayla that got mixed like a chatos, got mixed into the dam of an oida that has to be spritzed lamata. How do you deal with it? Rabbi Eliezer, our Rabbi Eliezer says, Yitein lamayla. You could spritz dam lamayla from this mixture. V'atachtonim aluloi, and the tachtonim will work. So let's understand what he says. Zokt Rashi, hanitn lamayla. I'm on the fourth line of Rashi. Kosol kadaitach dam chatos b'dam oila. We're under the impression that now pshat is that you have dam chatos that are mixed in a container with dam oila. So yitein lamayla, you should spritz the dam on the top of the mizbech. Lahachshir chatos. You should first spritz lamayla to be machshir the chatos. Why? Maybe spritz lamata first. The mitzvah lahaktim el yonim lechdachtoid. Whenever you have dam that has to be spritzed on the top of the mizbech versus the lower half, you always spritz the blood first that has to be placed on the top. Kida amar lekaman prepare kalatadir, like we're going to learn later in the Mishnah. Now, the problem is, what business do you have spritzing dam that could potentially be from the dam ha'oila up on top of the mizbech? So as we learned yesterday, any dam from an oila that gets spritzed up there as part of the mixture, we'll just look at it like it's water. Rabbanan, you don't do that. We learned ishafich lama. The whole dam has to be split up, has to be spilled up. So now let's think. There's two purposes for the tachtonim. The dama, the chatas, need shvicha shiraim liyasoid, so they need a matan as well on the bottom half of the mizbeach. But the oila also needs zrika. Its main zrika to fulfill it has to be done on the lower half. The lashon of Rabbi Eliezer is The dam that you're going to spritz on the bottom of the mizbeach will work. Will work for what? So Rashi, k'sheyachzer v'yitin shirayim lamata l'shem shirayim ololoi. First, it'll fulfill the need to dump the shirayim of the dam of the chatos by the yisoid, but the af lamata dam oila. It's also going to work to fulfill the zrika that the carbon oila requires. So it's going to have a dual purpose. Freik the Gemara, the Amrit Ein Bila. If you learn like Rabbi Ashi in Rabbi Eliezer that Ein Bila, how can you be sure when you're spritzing dam on the top half of the mizbeach that you have any content of dam chatos? That might be only the dam oila, because in any mixture there's different pockets. So how could you say amai oiloi? How could you say that it works for the chatos? It's quite possible. Maybe all the dam that you spritzed lamaila was only dam of the oila, and all of the dam that you spritzed lamata was only dam of the chatos. And you shouldn't be yotzei the zrika not for the chatos and not for the oila. Zok Gemara, if you hold yesh bila, it's not a problem. But Rabbi Ashi, you're the only one in Rabbi Eliezer who holds ein bila. How are you going to understand Rabbi Elazar's psak in relation to the dam chatos and the dam oila getting blended together? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you how Rabbi Ashi will learn it. No problem. Most of the blood here is from the chatos. There's only a little bit of blood in this mixture that's on the oila. So let's say, just for argument's sake, you have 10 ounces of dam chatos and you have 2 ounces of dam oila. The kayoyv l'mayla shir tachtonim v'oid. When you spritz the dam on top, you spritz 3 ounces. So if you spritz 3 ounces, there has to be at least 1 ounce of dam that's dam chatos. So that's how you can be guaranteed that you're going to fulfill the zrikas dam chatos, because you used more ounces of dam than the full content of the dam oil. So okay. If you're telling me that there's a possibility that all of the dam oil was spritzed to maila and then some, well then how could Rabbi Eliezer say that when you spritz the dam on the lower half, it fulfills the need of the carbon oila? The dam that you're spritzing in the bottom half might in fact have no dam oila content at all. Zakhtama, you're right. L'shem shirayim, you're right. The oila, there's no solution for, and Eliezer's solution does not work to make a zrika on the oila, but it will at least work to fulfill the chiyuv of zrika shirayim on the yisod for the chatos. So when Rabbi Eliezer said "V'tachtanim ololoi," he didn't really mean that it's ololoi sai for the oila, sai for the chatos. He just meant it's ololoi for the chatos, because the oila, we might not have any dam oila here at all. Beautiful. So now at least we explained how Rabbi Ashi will understand Rabbi Eliezer's halacha when it comes to the al yonim tachtonim. But the Gemara has another kash. Tashma, nasan lamata v'loy nimlach. What happens if the kohen didn't ask a question, and instead of spritzing lamaila tachtonim v'oid, like we just said it's supposed to happen, he made zrika lamata v'loy nimlach. So Zok Rabbi Eliezer, how do you deal with it? All you do is yachzer v'yitain lamaila. After you spritz the blood lamata, go and spritz the blood lamaila, and everything will work. So the problem is, how could that be possible? Maybe what he spritzed lamata was only dam chatos, and maybe what he spritzed lamaila was only dam oila. Zok to Gemara, Hachanami, Berubal Yonim, say the same scenario. There's 10 ounces of chatos, there's 2 ounces of oila, and you're able to put 3 ounces on top. So for sure, one of those 3 ounces had to be dam from a chatos. Freik the Gemara, V'tachtonim ololoi. So how come Rabbi Eliezer said that the zrika at the bottom was good? Maybe you don't have any content of dam of the oila. Zok to Gemara, l'shem shirayim. The kasha was with the Tachtanim Alulai Katani. The Gemara Shem Shram, the same text we said a moment ago. Rabbi Eliezer never said that the Tachtanim Alulai Saifa Oila Saifa the Chatos. He just means for the Chatos. Tashma, we have another kasha. What about Nosnan Lamaila? So Rabbi Eliezer holds that's what the Bezdin would tell him. In such a case, put it Lamaila. But the Rabbanan said Yishafeich La'ama. What if you didn't do what the Rabbanan would have told you, and you did what Rabbi Eliezer said, and you made Zrikas Lamaila, now already, once we're at the point where we already spritzed the Maila, then the Rabbanan would be agreeable to Rabbi Eliezer at this point. Elu ve'elu moedim, Sai the Rabbanan. And Sai Rabbi Eliezer agree, Sheyachsar v'yitein lamata, now make another Zrikas Adam on the lower half of the Mizbeach. That's halacha number one, because think, even according to the Rabbanon, once we've already did the Zrika Lamaila, there's no problem of making the Zrika Lamata. Because Sai if it's an Oila, Sai if it's a Chatos, and needs Zrika Lamata. So at this point, that a mistake was made, and the Zrika Lamaila, which should not have occurred, happened, you might as well do the Zrika Lamata. Then the Brisa goes on, ve'elu alulai. Sai the dam Chatos, and Sai the dam Oila will be alulai. The question is, how could you say that? If it's speaking where you might have spritzed the dam oila on top, how can you say elu oila? So tomorrow again, hachanami beruba el yoinim. It's the same case that we keep on saying that there's 10 ounces of chatos, 2 ounces of oila, the kayav l'mayla shir tachtonim v'oid, and you spritz 3 ounces on top. We for sure know that one of the ounces was surely dam chatos. Frag to Gemara, you can't use that anymore because it says elu ve'elu aluloi, referring to side the dam oila, side the dam chatos. But this only works for the chatos because all the oila dam might be spritz l'mayla. Zok to Gemara, mikatani elu ve'elu moedim, elu aluloi katani. Who said that Rabbi Eliezer would agree to this? What did the Brisa say? If it was Natan L'mayla, Sai Rabbi Eliezer and Sai the Rabbanon are moida that you should be Yachshav Yitin Lamata. Then the Brisa says, Ve'elu alulai. Sai the Dam Chata, Sai the Dam Oila was alulai. Who said that's Rabbi Eliezer? In fact, maybe it's not Rabbi Eliezer. Because like you said, if you hold Ein Bila, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you wouldn't be out to the Dam Oila. You would only be out to the Dam Chatos. But according to the Rabbanan, that you hold Yesh Bila, in fact, you would be out to side the Dam Oila and side the Dam Chatos. So Zek the Gemara, Elu ve'elu moida means they're both moida shiach shavit lamata. But the next Elu ve'elu aluloi, that not necessarily is being said according to Rabbi Eliezer. Maybe that's only being said according to the Rabbanan. So let's see the Gemara inside. Mikatanu Elu ve'elu moidin. No, it says Elu ve'elu aluloi katani, and let's say Seifa Asan Rabbanon, the Seifa that says it's Oila Saila Shem Chatos, Saila Shem Oila, that's only according to Rabbanon, the Amr Yesh Bila, but not according to Rabbi Eliezer, who according to Rabbi Ashi holds Ein Bila. So we're really hammering away at Rav Ashi. You said this innovative shot in Rabbi Eliezer that he holds Ein Bila. We're asking many kashas. So far, Rav Ashi has been successful in repelling these kashas. But the Gemara asks another kasha. Tashma, hanitnin b'matana achas, shenis arvu b'nitnin b'matana achas. Our Mishnah, Bechor got mixed up with Meiser. They each carbon would only need one matana. What does the Mishnah say? What should you do? Yinatnu b'matana achas. Give one matana from this mix, and you're going to be okay. The problem is, if you hold yesh bila, then yeah, there'll for sure be content of the dam of the Bechor and the dam of the Meiser in this drop. But if you only put one drop of dam, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's quite possible that it's either only dam chatos, Meiser, or only dam Bechor. So how can you say yinasnu b'matanachas? Zog to Gemara, you know what it means, yinasnu b'matanachas? Means dilma mehai Gemara dilma mehai kayoyiv, mehai loy kayoyiv. If you all ain't bila, maybe only the dam of one of these two karbanos are in the content of this drop that you spritzed on the mizbeach. Zok to Gemara, the same halacha. This arvu achas ba'achas. There was only one sheer zrika of the dam of the meiser, and there was only one sheer zrika of the dam of the chata of the bechara, and you have to make two zrikas. One, you have to make two zrikas. So both drops have to be placed on the mizbeach. So we know for sure that some dam meiser was put on the mizbeach, and side dam bechara was put on the mizbeach. Okay, frankly, let's try the other case. Matan arba, matan arba. You have an oila that needs time shein arba that got mixed in with a shlomim that needs time shein arba. What does it say? Just put matan arba. So the problem is, how do you know that you have the content of both karbanos? If it's ein bila, you might the matan arba that you did might only be the dam of one of the two karbanos. So tomorrow hachanami shenis arbu arba b'matan arba ba'arba. It's speaking where you had exactly 8 servings, 4 to fulfill the zrika of the oila, 4 to fulfill the zrika of shlomim. They got mixed together. You have to put all that dam in your zrika of the four zrikas, and then you for sure have included content of both karbanos. Pray to Gemara. What about matan arba b'matan achas? What about a case where, let's say, an oila's dam got mixed in with the dam of meiser, which only needs one matana? So now the question is, if you only, it's what is the halacha? The halacha is you put 4 matanas, right? There was a question if it's baltoisiv or not, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, you put 4 matanas. If you put 4 matanas, you might not have the full content of the oila, you might not have the content of the meiser. So once again, you're going to be stuck. So Zok to Gemara, going on to Pei Aleph, Omer Aleph. V'chitema hachanami b'nisar ba'achas. If you're going to tell me there's exactly the right amount for one of them, that won't help either, because Ihachi Omer le Rabbi Shua. What did Rabbi Shua tell Rabbi Eliezer why you can't put from this mixture 4 matanos, because you're going to be over Bal Tosef on the dam that belong to the Bechar and Meiser. But why would he say that? Ihachi Omer le Rabbi Shua. Hareyu over al Bal Tosef. Why did Rabbi Shua say you'd be about Bal Tosef? Hacha Bal Tosef mehecha. You only have one shear of dam. So you could have only spritzed one shear of dam of the Bechar or the Meiser. So why would there be a Bal Tosef over here? You spritzed 4 matanos of dam plus 1 matan of dam. The maximum that you did over there was 1 matan of dam of the Bechar Meiser. So where was there any Bal Tosef over here? So we're a little bit stuck with how to explain this part of the Mishnah. Let's see Rashi. V'chitema hachanami b'nisar matana achas b'nabachor. B'shir matan dalad matanas b'na'oila. And you have exactly the bare minimum amount of dam. So therefore you're only spritzing the bare minimum of what you have. It means yinasnu chameshtan ka'amar. It means all five servings of dam you put on the 4 corners of his back. Shunit and dalad matanos. Vadai mina oila. You're for sure going to have from the oila 4 matanas as well, and there'll be at least 1 matana in that content of the Bechor Meiser. Also, Rabbi Shua Meimar Yesh Bila. Rabbi Shua is going to say Yesh Bila. V'dayoi b'matana achas al shneim. 1 matana would be enough for everything, because there's for sure some content of both damim in any bit of blood that you take. And Rabbi Shua says, "V'lo yaver al Bal Tosef," the less leroy, and he holds that you shouldn't be over on Bal Tosef. But the problem over here is Hacha Bal Tosef mehecha haray einkan min habechor ela kedei matana. You only have enough for 1 matana in the dam of a bechor. So how is it that Rabbi Yeshua is claiming that there's going to be a Bal Tosef? So we're going to have to end off with this kasha, and we'll be mamshech Bez Hashem tomorrow. Everyone should have an awesome day.
Oh,
Today's a
yeah.
special day in every Masechta. I call it payday. So today's a good day. Because
Good.
we're doing that pay. So it's payday. Okay, have an awesome day and a safe trip.
Thank you.